Hi, everybody, and hello, virtual friends joining us. I'm Kathy Berner. I'm the event coordinator at Blue Willow Bookshop. And this has been a long time coming. One of our last events before the world shut down was with Isaac for How to Be a Pirate. And it's just a joy to have you back. So welcome.
It feels so good. Thank you for having me. They let me sign the wall here. That seemed like a wild thing. We did, and I look at it almost every day when I walk in, as it reminds us to stay brave.
Before we start, I do want to acknowledge family and community. To our bookseller friends and to all our booksellers in the room, especially over the past 2.5 years, Isaac has stepped up to support the bookselling community, working with Bank and encouraging readers to purchase books from independent bookstores, helping us stay open. And ever since he has come to the store, he has been a member of the Blue Willow family. And especially in the past 2.5 years, you have become a member of the Berner family. So thank you for everything.
I'm grateful to you.
And I am so happy to be able to hold this book. No, that's right. You can.
I was gonna say.
See, look, I
there. That's the one. Let's show that off.
Down with my tags.
Yeah.
But Dirtbag, Massachusetts has been a long time coming. You've had so much great commentary on it, and
whoa!
Oh my God!
Hi.
Hello. This is Antoine.
Hi, everyone. Come on, get it up. One of the best. It worked. We are very surprised.
We were just talking about you. Anyway, a picture book author just walked in who we're big fans of.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, where did this book come from?
I mean, this is a book, like, it's interesting. You get asked on the road a lot, like, how long did it take you to write this? And like, there's a very easy answer, which is like a couple essays in the book I wrote a few years back, but I really started writing in earnest when I was about 35. I'm 39 now. But there's a much more complex and longer answer than that, which is I probably started really dreaming, not knowing how to write at all, but really knowing that I just loved books and I wanted to make something like this around the age of 23. But then if I'm really being honest, a lot of the stories that are contained in this are the stories that were told to me, because this is very much a book about how we can write our own stories, but also how the stories that are told to us, especially as we're children, can really ripple out through the rest of our lives. Those are the stories that were happening to me, and I was thinking about them not only in my teenage years, but going back to 8, 5. So there's many different answers to where did it come from, but the heart of it is my childhood. There are other stories, there's many different age groups in this book, but the heart of it is this book came from my childhood.
Why is it called Dirtbag?
This is a good story. All right. I grew up in Boston. Massachusetts. And I was actually, my parents were unhoused, and we became part of this community called the Catholic Worker, which is very much, imagine the faith of Catholicism, books by Thomas Merton. The group was started by a wonderful woman named Dorothy Day, very much believing in the tenets of Catholicism, of giving your shirt off your back, supporting your neighbor. If they need something, we can come together as a community and help each other out. Much less the institutional faith, much more kind of a homegrown DIY faith. And it was an incredible place to grow up. But then I moved out to north central Massachusetts. And there's a few different spots that we bounced around out there. But where we ended up in was a place called Athol, Massachusetts. I'll give you one guess what everyone else in the state of Massachusetts called Athol, Massachusetts. Well, it turns out you can't call a book Bleed, Massachusetts. And so I was talking with my friend Jason Diamond, who's a brilliant author, about this issue. And don't get me wrong, they also call this Rat Hole, Massachusetts. We were one of the poorer towns in what is actually a very rich state. And we had like the highest teenage pregnancy rate per capita at the time. There's just a lot of interest, like tough stuff there. So I was like, oh, maybe Rat Hole, Massachusetts, but like just doesn't have the same ring as Murmur, Massachusetts. And Jason just didn't miss a beat. And what's amazing about this is we're actually driving to Boston at the time. We're going to stay in a little dingy motel in the shadow of Fenway Park at the moment. He just, off the top of his head, he was just like, Dirtbag, Massachusetts. It's like, it should be Dirtbag, Massachusetts. It clicked. At that time, I didn't even think I was going to write about my childhood in this book. I thought it was going to be disparate, separate essays about different things. But when he said that title, it's like the whole project just shifted a little bit. And that's how good of a title I think it is. But shout out to Jason Diamond. I didn't even come up with it.
Yeah, but it is fantastic. So then you pivoted more towards, instead of writing about cultural moments, I mean, there are some cultural moments in here, but instead of writing about cultural moments, you wrote more about your own life experience.
That's right.
A number of us on staff have read it, and
It means a lot to me.
all in one sitting, and it resonates, and different things have resonated with different readers.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to put those essays in? That's the first question.
Mm-hmm. Well, hang on. Okay.
It's kind of part of it.
All right.
And then the second question is from Christina. Why'd you put them in that order?
Great question. And also great question. Okay, so the first part of the question, for a very long time, like you mentioned, I was working on essays that were going to be in the book. The best example of the essays that I thought were going to be contained in this collection is there's an essay in this collection about the band The Hold Steady and what they meant to me. Don't get me wrong, it's still very much a personal story, but it is also very much about the band members and the music of the solo artist, Craig Finn, once he was doing his own projects and then the band coming back together. So it's very much about almost popular culture with some of my own story interwoven through. And that's what I thought it was going to be. I thought there was maybe, I don't know, something about my father and Star Wars, this, that, the other thing. As I would write those essays, as I worked on them, time and time again, I found myself having to explain more about my childhood. I'd be like, well, the reason it's like this is because of this. And this happened because of this. And this, the more and more I did that, I recognized the stories that were trying to be told while I was writing, the stories that actually seemed to be important, were these stories that for a long time, I told myself I would never, ever, ever write. I swore I wasn't going to write about my childhood. And it's clear to me now, of course, hindsight 2020, but it can take a whole lifetime to learn some of these lessons, right? I realized I was shying away from those stories because I was ashamed of them, because I was maybe a little scared of them. I didn't know if I wanted to be that open and be that much in the world, but here I was trying to write these other pieces, and those stories were the ones that were calling out to be written. So as I worked on the project, I started abandoning the idea, which God bless my editor at Bloomsbury, who all of a sudden I was like, oh, I sold you this book, but what? I turned it in a completely different book. But they were very supportive, and that turned into to the collection really becoming what it is. And so once I had them formed, you're absolutely right. And I'm not joking. This is basically goes into the pandemic, of course. So I just need you to know that my beard was getting longer. My hair was getting longer. Poor Kathy Berner was talking to me about once a week, I think, to make sure I didn't walk into the ocean. And I appreciate that. Thank you. And another person who's checking in on me a lot was my editor. Sometimes I think to make sure that I was ready. And again, also maybe sometimes to make sure, like Kathy Berner was, that I wasn't walking into the ocean. When I finished rough drafts of these essays, I printed them all out, and I really did. I had them laid out on the table for a very long time on a coffee table. And it was almost like it all happened again. The stories had been written down, those stories that I found so difficult. And then it's almost like I started ignoring them again. I started coming up with other reasons not to look directly at them, even though they sat there. And so for weeks during the pandemic, I was kind of sitting, they were just sitting there. But eventually what happens is you got to make rent. And they don't just give you the money if you don't turn it in. So that's when I sat down and I really tried to find the through line, because these essays, they do jump around in time, but I realized that there was an arc that was coming through. There was not just like each story as a standalone story, but there was this kind of tale of somebody who had a difficult childhood and then reacted to that childhood. And at the time, if you'd asked me in my 20s, I would have said, no, this is me being independent. This is me putting that childhood behind me. This is me living my own life, not recognizing that actually a lot of my actions were still very much linked, or, me trying to push against that childhood that I experienced. And even then, when I found that arc, the first and last essay of the book, the first one being family stories, the stories that were told to me, And then my story, the story that I realized I had to come to tell myself. I actually wrote it as one essay, split in the middle, then handed it to you. Who'd you just point at?
I just pointed at my husband who read it. He was like,
Oh yeah, no, 100%. That's I just had that and at the end of the first essay is just me being like cut and then moving it to the back. So that was the reason why I decided to just lay them out the way that they are.
I want to remind our bookseller and other friends who are watching that they can type questions into the chat, and my colleague Jennifer will relay them to us.
Hang on, I'm sorry. Now I got one last thing.
Yeah, you go.
The one last thing I do want to say, why that snip, like why I decided to do that. I could have kept that essay as a very big, long beginning essay. In fact, there's precedent for that. Himlall's White Girls comes to mind. I'm pretty sure that is a book that almost starts with almost a short novella, and then there's a bunch of essays after, or it might be the other way around. Fact check me on that. But I could have started with a very long essay and then had these other ones. The reason I did that is something that I actually was inspired by Nick Flynn, who of course very famously wrote Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, which is also a great Massachusetts book with a great title that deals with issues of being unhoused and addiction and family trauma. And so I remember listening to him, or maybe I read it in an interview where he once talked about, well, this is very much, the form is taken from Moby Dick. And I didn't quite know what he meant by that. And what he was talking about was basically the father figure in his book, Looms Very Large, much like the whale looms very large in Moby Dick. You hear all these stories about it, but you don't actually see the whale until the last 50 pages. That's when I realized I can't put everything in the front. I wanted, because a lot of these essays in this book were written when I wasn't ready to look directly at this. So I touch on it, I make reference to it, but I don't actually show you everything. And I realized what I wanted to do was the same thing that Herman Melville did, the same thing that Nick Flynn did, which was take the real looking directly at what happened to me and put it at the very end of the book. So the reader gets a feel of what's happening, but then rewarded's not the right word, but that they come to recognize, and I've heard it. They've told me, they're like, oh, by the end, I don't even think you're actually going to mention it. You're just going to only allude to it. And then in that last essay, I try to really just lay it out what happened.
Well, you did it. Tildy from Belmont sent me a question early.
Did I just talk for like the whole time?
You did.
No, okay, good.
No, we're not.
I was like, whoa, we're already in audience.
Tildy
just
sent
blacked
it
out and
early.
talked for 45 minutes. All right.
Tildy sent it early, and it fits into this.
Yeah.
So, was there an essay that you had to leave on the cutting room floor?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, there were those first essays were essays that didn't work for this, and I do actually maybe hope to return to them. But like I've already alluded to it. But there's a story to be told about my relationship with my father in Star Wars, which is to say that we grew up very low income, and we didn't have a television. But at one point, he took the time to figure out how to record using like a VCR and a television that he had access to. They were showing Star Wars on television. And I think there was something about his faith and something about, especially that first Star Wars movie, that like really felt like it was based on faith a little bit. Mm-hmm. So he took the time to record this VHS tape and he gave it to me. And I would then have to figure out how to watch it myself. And when I did, it was like half commercials that he forgot to stop it, like, and then it would jump into the middle. So for the longest time, Star Wars for me was like also like some toothpaste stuff, and like it was a long time before I saw an actual real cut of the not television half commercials version of Star Wars. But even that was just such a beautiful act on his part,
right?
Especially when when I was so young and when we were struggling as hard as we were. So an essay like that is something that I've always wanted to tackle, and I hope to at some point. The other thing that's not in this book is it took me a very long time to figure out how to write, and it took me a very long time how to get into the literary world, meet booksellers like yourselves and everybody here that meant so much to me. Libraries and bookstores were always very safe places for me. They're very important places to me. But for the longest time, I had a very skewed way of how books got made. I didn't understand it. I just knew they were these like little pieces of magic people could give you. I understood that there was contemporary fiction. There's a lot of old things that I was reading. So there's definitely an essay about how I had the childhood that I had, and then how I ended up being in the books world as much as I am. But when I finished that long essay that I alluded to earlier that couldn't happen, that book ends it, that's when I realized it was time to stop. I didn't need to go into that part of my story. I do think I will figure it out how to make it interesting at some point, but that for me felt like too tidy of an end. Like it felt a little bit like, don't worry, kids, that turned out okay, and look at me now, and look at all this, like that. One, that's not interesting, and two, it's important that this book to me feels like it's part of a conversation. I didn't want it to be one of these memoirs where then like it felt like there's a bow at the end. That doesn't feel very realistic to me. There's no real happily ever after in memoir and nonfiction, in my opinion. So that it became important to me that I realized I could either write 50 pages trying to explain that, or I could just leave it be, and I decided to leave it be.
Would also observe that you might not have been at the point to write that essay about your father in Star Wars.
100%. 100%.
And I'm hopeful we'll get to.
I think conversations he and I are having now because of this book will probably find their ways into. You're absolutely right. That was an uncompleted story, perhaps, for sure.
Well, you've been on tour, and I've been listening to you talk about your book. I think about both the function of storytelling and the cost of it.
Yeah.
And I think it has come at a cost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So why do you do it?
Great question. Oh, first off, I just want to say shout out to Kathy because these are wonderful questions, but also shout out to Kathy because I know that she's watched everything I've done and listened to every podcast. So you are, I'm not joking, getting the hardest working events that I'm going to have. Every other city, I can go in there and I can hit my canned answers and I know it's going to be, Kathy, I know is going to be like, yawn, boring, heard this one before. So I'm really trying to pull out like true original stuff for you all. I just want you to know you're benefiting. It's a little raw, it's not as polished, you're maybe not getting those warm fuzzy feelings, but it's a lot realer. All right, so at what kind? Whoa.
And
that's a big no. Stop.
Like,
You're not pushing.
Okay.
You're right. Listen, I think there are certain people in the world for which all attention feels good. Even bad attention, good attention, it doesn't matter to them. It feels like attention, and it feels good. I would argue for reasons that I'm still trying to figure out with my therapist, I have the opposite. Good attention, bad attention, all attention in a way makes me very nervous, makes me very anxious, which is something coming from somebody who's probably been on stage since they were like 10. Like there's clearly a drive in me to keep doing this, right? It's not that I shy away from it, but when it is happening, I think that's the price you're talking about. There's something about sharing a story that is so important to me. And I think it's because I believe maybe that story can make somebody in the world feel less alone, that maybe can change somebody's mind about something. That's the power of a story to me. This is one, I'm going to give one canned answer that Kathy's probably heard 100 times. Booksellers will have seen it because it's in the front of the book. But there's a play, The History Boys, and there's this line about reading that I came across when I was very young that meant the world to me, which is you can be reading a book, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but you can be reading a book and you come across an emotion or a thought or just even a moment in action that you think you alone are the only person on the planet that has had that, especially when you're a young reader. Oh, that's my secret. And then there you see it on the written page. And it's like a hand comes out of the book and grasps yours and you feel less alone in the world. If this book can do that for one person, that's going to be mission accomplished for me. So I think that's why I put the stories out there. I really believe in that magic because I felt it so much myself. That said, the answer that's not a canned answer because you're good at what you do, there is that price. And I think in my case, it is a price of knowing that, wow, like publication day felt incredible. So many things went right, but I still spent so much of that day like kind of almost wanting to curl up into a ball, like wanting to make myself smaller, wanting to disappear. The joke I often refer to is I just, it's very cliche, but like I just want to live by the ocean and not walk into the sea, but like just very close to the sea in a little shack and just disappear. But I think that's something, I hope to get better at accepting. I hope to be more present for, again, through the use of therapy. But I also think that even as anxious And as difficult sometimes as attention can feel for me, that dream and belief in that magic. And to be honest, when we talk about this, it can feel very much like faith. It can feel very much like Catholicism in a way. I believe, I have faith in the power of books, that I want to keep doing it. I'm proud to keep doing it. I don't want to take away from that. I am happy that I get to do what I do, and I'm proud to do it, even if it makes me feel very uncomfortable.
We've talked about a lot about your faith
Mhm.
over the past few years. And I was raised Lutheran, you were raised Catholic, and there's a lot of overlap there.
Mhm.
And the thing that I have found so transformative about a number of these essays is your capacity for grace.
Mm.
Because the Lutherans are all about the grace. You got the grace, you're golden. So considering that that's not a part of your faith history,
Mhm.
and considering a number of your life experiences, where do you find that grace?
Mm. I think in a way it's interesting, because I think it's becoming the theme of this talk that we're having, which it is in that intangible. It is in the unseen. It is in the belief that there can be something good that comes out of this.
Mhm.
And I think that's something I really believed in for a long time before I really understood it. And I want to talk about that for a moment. I want to tell a quick story that I did tell you on the way over here. But I just talked to my mother, and she's read the book. And there's a lot of different stories that can come out of that. But again, Kathy knows most of them. But this one just happened very recently, which is she reread it. And something she was able to say now in this rereading, just for the record, her first reaction to the book was, "I'm so sorry." Incredible thing I didn't know that I even wanted to hear. And the second thing she said was, "I had no idea you were carrying this," which is very, very true. She had no idea I was carrying that, because I do come off as a very positive and bubbly person. And I really want to show positivity and put that out in the world. And some of that comes from a very real place, and some of that I think comes from trying to hide a lot of this stuff for many, many years in my life. But the grace aspect of it, to me, has to be linked to forgiveness. And this is something that I truly like. That's when I realized that this book isn't just, oh, is it going to help other people? I hope so. But who it really helped also was myself, not just in the conversations that I'm now able to have with my parents, but it made me recognize that I had a warped sense of what forgiveness is. I think I was taught forgiveness from a very early age. It's a huge tenet of the Catholic Church, and something that is very complex within that institution as well. But I believed in forgiveness almost before I understood what forgiveness truly was. And so I think I had a sense of forgiveness that was a rush to move past things and just put them in the rearview mirror. The further away I can get from it, the easier it will be to forgive the person. The wrong can be forgotten, and then we can all move on with our lives. And I think I was a huge believer in that. And that was an incorrect belief. What it was a child's view of forgiveness. I didn't understand where real forgiveness can come from, which is to have actual, real conversations about these things, to really point to the wrongs that happen, for that person to then accept that, and for you to then have an understanding, and you get to decide together in a way almost how you're going to move your relationship forward, and if you are willing to let go of some of those things, not just putting it in the past, not just moving past it, but truly working on what it means to recognize it and name it and actually hold it, carry it with you. Don't move past it, but understand that you're still going to allow each other in each other's lives. And that was something that came from therapy. I started therapy about 3 years ago. And for the longest time, that was, and I'm not going to give too much away here, but the end of this book was supposed to be about forgiving my parents. And it took my therapist to say, you are not ready to do that. Sorry. Because you can't even talk to them. And so that's that changed something for me. And that's when I realized I can actually give real forgiveness and real grace by having a more adult, if I'm being honest, a more thoughtful understanding of it. Because before, I think I was still very happy. I'm still very quick to forgive, but that came from a place of wanting to smooth things over as quickly as possible. You got me before I got you. You made me tear up before I got you. I didn't think that was going to happen. I really thought I had you there for a second in the beginning. Anyhow, it's not a challenge.
No. One thing I want to just tangentially to this. I've read this book a number of times. And I shout out to Libro FM. I'm listening to it now also. And I was listening to the first essay earlier this week. And for the first time, you're writing, and maybe it was because it was your voice, but I started thinking about your mom's perspective. Because I have always been Team Isaac through this whole thing. And thinking about the situation in which she found herself and the way you conveyed the circumstances almost without judgment. And that is a true gift that you give your mother and you give the reader. So well done.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But can I say something about that real quick?
Yeah, please.
It's something I want to be clear. I think anyone, if you have aspirations to write and you're in this room, the best advice I can give you is to start. That said, I do think the story will come to you in their own time, and you'll work on them and you'll figure them out. I, at the age of 23, because of something that happened, was given the gift of like, oh, I knew I couldn't write. There's enough bad poetry from high school to know that I couldn't write. But I knew I had aspirations to do it, and then somebody said something to me at 23 where all of a sudden it felt that much closer, it felt that much more possible. If I'd written this book at 25, it would have been filled with anger. It would have been just a retelling of what happened and how friggin' pissed off I was about it. So I'm so grateful. Because at that point, I was estranged from my family. I didn't go home for Christmas. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving.
For how many years?
Almost 10. I'm so grateful that, because that's what the court, and this, sorry, this is a canned one, but it's good, so I'll use it. This is a story, it's a story of a family that blows apart, but then comes back together in a completely new and different and very strange, but still beautiful shape. And even back then, the joke I would often say is it's more of a family shrub than a family tree. But I'm so happy that we got to come back together and that this is, like I said, it's still an ongoing conversation. Because if I had written that book at 25, that door would have probably been closed. That would have been it. I would have burned all the bridges. At that point, I burned a lot of them, but I'm really happy that you speak about me giving grace to them, but the fact of the matter is my family, and I just don't mean my mother. I mean my half siblings and who have children. That's part of the reason why the families come back together. They have been so open and accepting of me. It's the last line of the acknowledgements. Is a lot of people with stories like this do not get love and support from their families when they tell them. And I'm very lucky. Don't get me wrong. It's not to say we haven't had some talks, but I'm very lucky to have a family that has shown me that same thing.
I'm going to kind of pivot a little.
Yeah,
give you a bit of a break.
Yeah. Okay.
Your friend Saeed Jones has called you the gold standard of literary citizenship.
Whoa.
That was in the heat of your work for Bink. For those of you who don't know, Bink is the book industry charitable foundation, and especially during the pandemic, they raised millions of dollars to give to bookstores and to booksellers who found themselves struggling because of the obvious circumstances.
Another way to put it real quick is that, because I'm a big believer in this, because I worked at a hotel where like none of us had health insurance, but we all just kicked into a pot so that if one of us got really messed up, we could take money out of the pot and go get fixed. And I feel like Bink, on a much more and tax-friendly and real as an actual nonprofit with paperwork, does that on such a large scale. And it means so much, not only to booksellers, but to comic book stores and comic booksellers. And they really came through with people not just having to maybe make rent during the pandemic or keep their paychecks during the pandemic, but like if you got a tooth that got impacted or something, they just really come through for people. Sorry.
They do. And you have been a massive supporter of Bink and a massive supporter of indie bookstores. And you're also hugely fond of libraries. So how many school librarians are in this crowd?
Y'all really saved my butt at one point. So shout out to y'all.
Why have bookstores and libraries always been such a sacred space to you?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. And I now get to tell the way that y'all saved my butts. My parents didn't have a lot growing up, and there was all sorts of different issues that came from that. But the one thing they did give me, they loved books. They really loved books. As much as they gave me Catholicism, probably even more so, if I'm being totally honest, they gave me books. And they loved them, and they believed in them. And everything I'm saying after there was something I had a young understanding of because of them. And so in Boston, without a lot of cash, the couple of things to do, you can drive up into the White Mountains, get up into New Hampshire, you get to camp outside. It's a pretty cheap way to spend some time. But another thing you can do is go to the library. And so in Boston, there's these two statues of two women out front who to be honest, I should probably look up what they actually are. But like when I was a kid, I used to pretend they were my friends or my moms or like whatever. Like I'd curl up in their lap and then I'd go into the library. I loved the library so much because it was a space that I could just be in and I could be a kid in and I could spend time in. And I came from a very unique place, which is the soup kitchen, and I was surrounded by characters. And don't get me wrong, I love that place too. It's interesting. On paper, if you looked at my childhood, the early years would be the ones you think would be rough. The later years were probably feeling a little better, but it was the opposite for me. When we were at our lowest was the times that I was at my happiest. But that's because of the support that libraries gave and librarians gave. And then when we get out to the country, there was a small independent bookstore that basically I would bike miles and miles, a whole other town over, and I'd hang out there. And we basically had an unspoken rule that was basically, kid, if you don't steal anything, you can we know you're not buying much, but like you can go through the store and it'll be fine. And just don't shoplift and good. And I made good on that for the most part, I think. But why booksellers? None of us are in this for the money. None of us, like nobody's getting rich off this. I mean, don't get me wrong, a few people are getting rich off of this. But for the most part, we are people that we believe in that magic that I was talking about earlier. So to support the booksellers community is so important to me because I love these little portals of magic that you can find anywhere across the country, which is to say, be it a library or be it an independent bookstore, here's a place where if a kid maybe doesn't understand themselves or maybe isn't getting the understanding that they need at home, they can find this place where they will find people and books that maybe understand them. That I think is so important and so important to encourage that. Just for the record, I want to be clear. Let's not make it too kumbaya. I also talk about bars in the same way. Because I do. In the same way, I think those are all, there's a set of rules when you walk into an independent bookstore. You know, obviously every bookstore can have a different soul, much like every bar can have a different theme or a different soul. You're going to find different ones that are working different things, but every bar still has that same kind of a name. You know how to order, be patient, act kind, you won't get kicked out, tip, etc. Bookstores are the same way. Of course, there are going to be different types of bookstores throughout in different regions of the country, but you're going to have at its core a belief in the power of storytelling. And if you walk in, you're probably going to find people. No, I'm not saying that everyone's going to be like-minded. What a boring world that would be. But you're going to have people that have faith and belief in the right to putting things down on a page and trying to get them in the hands of people you want. And, you know, you get to agree with some of it, you get to not agree with other parts of it. But that's what I love about bookstores. And that's what I love about booksellers, because here are people that could have done anything. But they believe in that too. So, you know, they work with their small margins and they make it work. And, you know, I hope everybody gets to own the building eventually so the landlords don't kick them out. But that's what's important to me. And that's what I think is so important. That's why I always want to, I will never say no to that.
Well, thank you for your service on that.
My pleasure.
Certainly appreciate it.
Oh, hang on. Sorry. I said the save the butt story real quick. I was also just saying, at one point I hit a kid in the face with a math book and he swings around in his real bloody nose and I get an in-school suspension because nobody wants to send me home because I think at that point the adults in my life realized things at home weren't going that well. And it was librarians and secretaries, and I'm just going to be honest with it, mainly women in my life who spotted the problems that were happening and then basically made moves to encourage me to apply to a place that offered free scholarship and allowed me to actually live in a school and get out of my home. And that was because those people noticed. And so I just want you all to know, I'm sure you all work with students who you are trying to support. And nobody gets to bat 1,000. You can't save everybody. I understand how hard it can be sometimes, but just know that even the little, small, incredibly tiny moments of kindness that you give people mean the world to them.
You do a lot of other things.
Ooh.
Talk a little bit about Walk It Off, because there are a number of Blue Willow staffers who like to walk, usually very early in the morning because it's so hot. But not so much about how you started walking, but like, what do you get from it?
Oh, I am gonna. I think those two things are actually linked. And again, not something I talk about very often, but I went to LA and I saw a buddy, and he's older than me. Great writer himself, David Ewan. I don't think he'd mind me mentioning him. Wonderful dude. He himself, tons of book background, book reviewing, just books. Anyways, I see him, he's skinny as heck. And I was kind of like, oh man. And I'm sorry, but again, because of my mix of bar culture, it's not all book though. There's a lot of bar culture in my life too. I was just like, you quit drinking? Because that's what it's that, or you got sick usually. And somebody in bar culture loses a lot of weight like that. And he went, no. And I was like, all right. And he was like, I just started walking. He's like, some health stuff's been coming up, and my doctor was just like, I should just be walking more. And he's like, for the longest time, I was looking for a sport, and I was exactly, when he said it, just clicked with me. Even running feels like it has too many things for me, like, let alone a racket with tennis, like just 2 shoes is like, I gotta switch my shoes. That seems like a lot. Maybe tomorrow. Walking, you can't have an excuse. I'm so sorry.
No, this is awesome.
Walking, you can't have an excuse. And so there was something about, he said that and it clicked. And it's not like I started walking the next day. It took the pandemic, which there's also a lot of things that happened in my life during the pandemic that all of a sudden gave me a lot more hours than I was used to having. And I understand that that's a great privilege because I think the pandemic is so hard for parents and many other people that have a lot of difficult things going on. But I basically found myself grappling with a lot of loneliness and a lot of time. And guess what fills a lot of that? So kind of like a maniac, I started walking. I'd lived in New York for a very long time, but I realized I hadn't actually explored much of the city. And why am I paying that rent? Ugh. If I'm not even getting out there and checking it out. And so that's when I realized I started walking around the park near my house that I didn't explore enough. Then I found a beautiful cemetery near my house that I hadn't checked out. Next thing you know, I was in other boroughs and I started walking basically 20,000 steps a day. I was basically walking 10 miles a day. I'm averaging more 15K if we're being honest, as the world opens back up. Let's be real. But walking to me, I had not a lot of rules, but there was a couple of them. One was I had to bring my phone because I got real addicted to those steps. God knows my steps. But I would turn it off. I'm not turning it off, but I'd turn it on airplane mode. So no checking social media. Just be out in the world. Just be present. And I had been working for the internet for a very long time at that point. So it was important for me to kind of disconnect from that a bit. The other thing that I tried to do, don't get me wrong, headphones, there's no right or wrong way to walk. Sometimes headphones for music, of course, but for the most part, I try to just be out there and be present. Another thing that was important to me, because it was during the pandemic, the little cash I had, I'd bring and I try to support a local business. Like just grab a bite to eat somewhere, find a new spot, find a new bookstore, something, just purchase some things. And what did I get out of that? For me, it was that not only it's of course walking is recentering, but I think especially as we spend more and more time online, we're more in time aware of the news, for more and more time just flooded with all this information from everywhere. Walking was a way for me to reconnect with a feeling that I hadn't had in a way since, which is just like, hey, you're just here. You're just in this one space.
Being present.
You just have to be present. You're not going to solve the world's problems right now. They're still going to be there. Don't you worry. Just move through the world, to steal a phrase from one of the people I interviewed during Walk It Off, who's a wonderful writer, Garnett, incredible walker as well. He said, it's to move through the world at a human pace. And it's important for Garnett to say that as well, because he's like, I don't mean just walking. Some people can't walk, or because of health issues or whatever. But he's like, what I mean when I say walk, I mean move through the world at a human pace. Everything has become so simple. And for me, walking is my way to reconnect with moving through the world at a human pace.
And you write about this.
Yeah. Well,
It's called
oh, Walk It Off. Oh, you want me to plug things? I have a Substack. It's called Walk It Off. It's free because I want to be poor forever, apparently. But there's
You can also support it.
there's a place
There's
where
like a sandwich a month
yeah,
program.
if you wanted to like buy me like a sandwich a month or a beer a month, it's like, $5, and I appreciate that very, very much. But yeah, it's called Walk It Off. And what I usually do at this point is I usually take somebody for a walk with me. And I'll interview them, most often writers or artists, and talk to them about what they do. And so that's been kind of a lovely project, something to focus on. And not to bring it back to the book real quick, but in the book I mentioned, so I moved out to California. That's when I mentioned earlier, I was estranged from my family for almost 5 years. I really thought I was the first person to do that. And I was like, I'll never forget. At one point I did talk, I was like, oh yeah, and I moved out to San Francisco. I just, I'd never been further west than Montana. I want to check it out. And both my parents were like, yeah, we did that too. Before we even met each other, after college, trying to figure yourself out, and I was like, oh, you jerks. And then the other thing is like what I mentioned earlier, the camping, right? My father loves to walk. My father always loved to walk. We'd go hiking in the White Mountains. That's how we spent. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was wild and ridiculous. The kid had a backpack and it was just like, yeah, week in the woods, we'll see what happens. But it was also incredible and adventurous. And it's wild to find myself as I get older, coming back to this incredibly simple thing that he himself still does, but used to do so much. And so it's just like, it's an interesting connection.
It is.
Yeah.
I've been dominating this a lot.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
There are.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah.
do it.
What
Oh,
you
this is
got?
gonna be fun. Hi, everybody on the internet, by the way. I didn't mean to speak over the internet. This part's great. Where we get to connect with each other from all over the world.
So we have a two-part question from Rebecca. Did you ever consider that you were disclosing private information about other people who may not want their story to be told?
Mhm.
And if so, how did you overcome that issue?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, of course. I was very concerned about the stories that I tell in this. I won't give it away, but my father even has a line towards the end of the book that is very, very, he's Irish American. It's very dry and funny, but also like kicks you in the heart. It's hard to be open about things like this. For me, it became important to talk about these things more openly because I'd had such a hard time talking about them, even in private or even admitting them to myself. And I realized that I was going to be able, of course, to change names and change, just a little bit, just enough that I felt comfortable sharing those stories, that they were not damning to other people, but that they were freeing for me to kind of drag out into the light. Because something we've been talking a lot about belief, something I really do believe in, is that more of us should be having conversations about all these different issues. Because what you find out, of course, and I think especially, this is actually one of the good things of the internet is you can connect with other people and you can find other people who have experienced things that you yourself have experienced. And because of that, we are understanding a lot more than we used to in the past, that every house probably has an issue. Now, some are maybe larger than others, but I remember growing up in a time when you were just like, well, they got it all figured out. What's wrong with us? No, you can't compare. It's a line that I had. You can't compare tragedies, of course, but everybody is going through something. And I think the more that we open up about these stories, the less we live in fear and want to hide them. We're going to find more connection, more forgiveness, more understanding of one another. And so that to me was very important. But I do want to end on like one little thing. I said to my mother, she said, I'm sorry. And that was incredible to hear. And then she said, I had no idea you were carrying this. And we had a big conversation of what that meant. It had a lot to do with the fact that she'd lived a long life, even at that moment. So those years to her felt like a rough patch. It was a rough few years. But when you're as young as that, that can feel like half your life. And that feels so much bigger. The next thing she did the next morning was send me an email. I was like, now here are the 300 things we could maybe change. And I understood that she was like, Dirtbag New England? Dirtbag America? Dirtbag world. Like, like, what about the last and what about this? Could we change it? And I read through them and I wanted to connect with that. It was her anxieties. It was her fear. She has her own life. She has her own story. She has her own way of looking at this. And I wanted to connect with that while at the same time kind of kindly writing back to her like, hey, good typo. She caught one time. I was like, good, I'm going to take that one. But the 299 others, probably not. But what I say, and I've been talking about this more and more, but when it comes to sharing, your story versus somebody else's story, this is what I said to her. And this is something I really believe. Look, there's a hunk of wood. There's a log. That's the truth. You can't put the whole truth in a book. You can't write every moment into a book. That's not a book anymore. That's
A log.
or just writing for the rest of your life, and you still couldn't do it. There's a log, and I said to my mom, here's this log. I understand. This is the truth. I understand the statue that you would carve out of this log, the shape that you would carve out of this log, is going to look so much different than the shape that I carved out of that log. And I understand that, and I make room for that. And I'm sure she wished there were more canoeing trips mentioned. Chapter 2, here's how we got along for a while. Like, I'm sure there are things she wishes were in there, and that hurt her heart that they're not. But I said to her, look, the truth is everything. You can't put everything. I carved a different shape than the shape you would carve. And I watched her recognize that. And again, that was another moment where she gave me a lot of grace. When she started contemplating, she started saying, I can understand that, because I think she realized she has her own relationships that she does that with. And I think we all do.
Let's take one from the audience that's present and would have to.
So you alluded to what your mother's reaction was. What was your reaction?
Oh, great question. There's departments like, are they watching? But to be honest, I think he'd be proud. He's fine. He's they're both very smart. They're incredibly smart people. And to be honest, they've gone through so much of their own things. And so, they are three-dimensional characters. And that's what I hope I express in the book. I don't want them to just feel like these big, shadowy, oh, come on, Fitzgerald. Sauron. I have Sauron.
Yeah.
I don't want them, I want them to feel like real human three-dimensional people. So my father's reaction, much later. Mom read it like the first second she got it. Father's reaction was to write an email. I can't quote you the whole thing, but I can paraphrase a few key wonderful ones. I don't know what to tell you, kid. Childhood's hard. And it's funny, right? But it is also true. I think, I got hit. I think he got hit more. I think that's true. I don't know what to tell you, kid. Childhood's hard. I probably shouldn't have given you so much Bukowski to read at such a young age. Also true. But also showing the influence that the love of book, like I think there is this part of him that is also proud. Is this the book that he would have wanted me to probably write? No. Is he proud that I wrote a book? I think yes. I think deep down that is there. The last thing he said, I mean, not the last, there was a lot. But he was just like, oh, hang on. Childhood's hard. Shouldn't have given me so much because to read. Oh, there's one other just like joke. No. This was in an email after. I'm not going to remember the last one, but it's just know that it was exactly that. Like, it was both funny, but it really touched on something. But what he ended with, which again, very downplayed, but just meant the world to me. Well, see you at Thanksgiving. Which is funny, but also his way that's like, hey man, we're gonna keep talking. I'm not writing you out. I don't see this as such an affront that it's worth our relationship. And that is what this book has been. That none of that gets to be in here. but I do try to leave it open-ended because life doesn't wrap up perfectly, and it's still not wrapped up perfectly. I want to be very clear about that. But I'm having some of the best conversations, not just my mother, but also my father. They're more jokey and a little stilted, but than I had in years. So he reacted, he reacted, I don't know if well is the right word, but with an understanding that I appreciate.
Jennifer, I think.
Yes. Stephanie says, going from a picture book to an essay collection like this is quite a different writing experience. How did you end up starting in Kid Lit, and how has that experience impacted your adult writing, either from a craft perspective or from your journey connecting with and charming bookstores?
Wow.
That's Stephanie Hines from Print.
That's a great question. All right, this is a bit of a long one. Sorry, I'll try to wrap it up quick. One, just read the New York Times review because it's hilarious. I mean, no, it's not hilarious. It's very thoughtful, and it actually treats the book with an air of respect that I deeply appreciated. But it's written by comedian Michael Ian Black. He's also written a lot of books himself, including a letter to his own son about masculinity, and he just did an incredible job, I thought, which is not to say that it was a rave. It was just like a very beautiful, thoughtful consideration of the book, and I deeply appreciated it. But many people, when it went live screenshot, it was like kids book, and then it was truly, it just like many. I can't quite nail it, but if you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's this pivot that he does in between two paragraphs, where everyone's like, "Well, that took a turn. That took it." It's like the world's national best-selling children's book, How to Be a Pirate. And like the next line is like, "Anyways, a life of blah blah blah." And everyone's like, "Oh." I won't lie. There was a worry. There was a worry for me in a way. Like, oh, am I going to be allowed near schools after this comes out? Time will tell. Kids literature, of course, means the world to me because that's how I came to reading, and I think that's true of so many of us. I think a children's book, a picture book, a YA book, a middle grade book can do more to shape a child's life than so much more. I think when we come to adult literature, I love it. It's beautiful. It's a great art form. And it can, of course, still impact us and touch us deep down in our core. But at that point in our age, we have a core. Some of those books can actually help shape a child's core. And I just think that's incredibly powerful art form. And it's something that I love about it. But just to answer the first question, I'm going to try and do as quickly as possible. I came to Kids Lit writing because I had a book bouncing around in my head for about 10 years. I had a friend whose kid called me the Stamp Man. I wanted to do a children's book about tattoos. I moved to New York City. I just feel incredible. It feels like the grace of the universe. My backdoor neighbor happened to be a man, John Cheska, who actually brought me yeah, could you imagine? Yeah, just the guy that wrote Stinky Cheese. Wow, incredible. So he's like drinking rosé in his backyard. I'm drinking rosé in my backyard. We get through talking through the fence. I have no idea who he is. He has no idea who I am. We just get to chatting. Eventually invites me around to his house. Then I kind of start to figure, all right, we're kind of figuring this out, right? I have this kids book idea. It's been bouncing around my head for 10 years. This is John Cheska. I don't want to be a jerk. How many people do you think walk up to John Cheska and say, I got a kids book idea? So I was like, can't do that right away. So hang out for like 30 more times. And then I feel, somewhere between all right, now I feel comfortable enough. I bring it up. I tell him, I'm not going to give you the whole long story, but I had this thought. It was about a tattoo book for kids. None of the pirate stuff was in it. None. I just give it to him. And he just goes, that's not a kid's book, right? And I'm crushed. In that moment, I am crushed. I'm just like, I've overstepped bounds. I've ruined this friendship. Oh, God. What did I do? Why? But luckily, in 0.5 seconds, the next words that come out of his mouth is, if you want to come over every Friday for the rest of the summer, I can teach you how to take that very bad idea and turn it into something that children might want to read. And that's what he did. And I got a lesson. I got a lesson that you can pay for. You don't get to apply to college for. Yeah, I got a master. The first time I walked over there, he had every single children's book in his library, which is huge, pulled out. They were on the couches. They were on the coffee tables. It was incredible. And he was like, read through all those. I'll be in the backyard drinking rosé. And I was like, what in the Karate Kid? But it did it. He did it. And so that's how I came to write a book for children. And I feel very grateful, of course, to John for all of his guidance and all of his thoughts, and Bridget Berger, who did the incredible illustrations, could have thought of a better illustrator. Illustrator Sarah Shumway, who's the editor at Bloomsbury, incredible. Could shout out more and more.
Might also be on the call.
Yeah. So Shout out. But I do want to say, like, that is part of it. That's the part that's going to get the laughs, and that's a very important part of the story. But the other part of the story is the part that we breezed by, that it kicked around in my head for 10 years. This book, why did I go from Kids Lit to this book? This book has been kicking around in my head for even longer. And I don't get an aha John Sheska moment with this book, but throughout my life, I have had these little moments, which again, I want to keep it quick, so I'm not going to get into them, but like 826 Valencia, a wonderful creative writing place for children out on the West Coast, taught me as an adult a lot of things. Many different people and many different writers, many people who I care about and love about, helped me with this book. Gave me guidance on this book. People, my editor did an incredible job on it, but so did other people. Other people gave edits, but it was a story that was kicking around in my head for a very, very long time. I am somebody that believes you got to tell the stories you want to tell. So I got to tell a kid's book story. I get to tell this story. I've got my other 2 tattoo books with Wendy McNaughton, who's an amazing illustrator. She did Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. I get to tell those stories. I'm going to get to tell whatever story's next. I feel very lucky and grateful for that. But let's say there's a world where I don't keep having that kind of luck. I think those stories are still going to want to get out of me. Maybe I'll be selling them as pamphlets somewhere, or who knows? I'll just be emailing Kathy, just long screeds. But I want to tell. I want to write the stories I want to write, and so I can't be scared about, oh well, because I'm a children's book writer, I can't do stuff like this, or oh, because I'm like this, I can't do stuff like this. I have to be able to tell my truth.
We do have a follow-on comment. Sarah Shumway says, I'm here.
Ah!
And someday soon, Isaac will write more for young readers. I'm not worried about letting him into school.
Because that man is under contract. Anyways.
No, but I don't know if you remember, but we were having one of our conversations and you were like, are they going to let me back into schools?
Yeah.
And I might have shouted at you.
Yeah, you did. You
I full named you.
Yeah, you did.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I was like, William Isaac Fitzgerald.
That's when she gets the first one in there that you get in trouble.
I was like, I will
Yeah.
proudly bring you into schools across Kansas.
Yeah.
And I will probably come see you.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you. I do. I think that's an important part of what we're talking about earlier. Is that it seems more and more now we might have to fight for getting into schools, and I'm just glad that there are so many people that are doing that work. So thank you for doing that. And I do remember you yelling, because that is, to be honest, it's funny as we were talking about this, I realized that's such a joke that my father would go, oh, they won't let me near schools. It's 100%. I'm sharing something I'm actually anxious about while trying to.
No, I mean, I was in the backyard and John's like, who are you yelling at? Let's do one more from the audience, or do you have one
Sorry,
more?
Stephanie Hines says, always welcome to schools in Portland, Maine as well.
Hooray!
Yay.
Yay, thank you.
So let's do one more in-store question.
So Isaac, I lived in San Francisco, so
This is the one who corrected you, Jen.
Yes, I want to talk to you about that.
we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we got fact check that.
But I just really loved how, and it's like, so I guess it's more of a comment than a question. It was just more that I just really loved, because I lived in San Francisco. I think we actually overlapped at the same time. So it was pre a high tech, and so there was a grittiness, and you could still live in San Francisco on very little money, and I certainly did so. My rent was $300 a month.
Woo! I
Yeah.
was 600, so
Well,
yeah,
so there you
nice.
go. I got lucky.
Yeah.
So I just loved that you kind of shared the underbelly of the city that is certainly still there, but has certainly gotten washed over, and it's very hard to find that still in San Francisco because it's gotten so gentrified
Yeah.
away.
And so antiseptic, yeah.
Yeah, so antiseptic. And I just loved that you did that and that you showed all of that. The bar scene in particular, because I had my own bars.
Can I ask, you want to shout a couple out? Or you don't have to, no pressure.
No, mine were, I lived over in North Point, so mine was Buena Vista and
Love Buena Vista,
yeah, just fun stuff.
where they invented the Irish coffee.
So you could walk down there and get home still.
Yeah.
So yeah, places like that, but places in North Point that were just special to us because they were cheap.
Yeah.
Back then, but it's just so different now, and I just thought it was such a nice thing that you just really captured it. The kind of the quiet little communities that are the private. There's so much of that in San Francisco that's there's fences and you don't see behind those fences unless you know the back door into the bar, or into the back room of the bar, and blah, blah, blah. And I just love that you showed that.
Thank you very much. And but I do want to talk about it for a moment too, because one thing, thank you. Two, that's exactly right. Everything you just said, like these places have these truly almost, you can call them micro communities. And why I want to do that is because San Francisco itself has many microclimates. I remember when I first moved out there, it was the first time I flipped the newspaper over, and it wasn't the weather in the country or even the city or even the state. It was truly like different weather for each neighborhood, because the way the hills work and the seawater comes in, like some places are foggy, some places are sunny. Anyhow, I think that builds these like almost small insular communities that can be so beautiful and wonderful. The one thing I do want to say, don't get me wrong, that city is getting kicked with tech money right now, and I do hope to write about it at one point. I still believe in San Francisco. San Francisco has always been a boom and bust town, and there was the gold rush, like since the beginning, since the first .com. It has always been a financial place that is growing, shrinking, earthquake, recovery from it, etc. So for me, that San Francisco, don't get me wrong, it's fighting, and it's hard, and it's getting its butt kicked a little bit right now, but it's still there. Zeitgeist is still there. I have friends who, maybe they're living 7 people to a house instead of 5 people to a house back like we used to, but they are still there. They are living in that beautiful, beautiful city. And I always believe that is a city that has poetry and sailors and everything at its heart that makes it so special. And I don't think the tech money is ever going to be able to fully scoop that out. And I mean, it's not the less grittiest example, but it is like Tenderloin's still there. They can't get rid of it. That is in the heart of the city. And they tried. They put Twitter HQ in the center of the city. They're like, this will make it better. Nah. So like it's I think that spirit is still there.
I agree.
I live in Orinda.
Heck
Have you
yeah.
heard of that?
Yeah, of course. I love it.
I was born in Walnut Creek, so yeah.
And
I've been around.
I love the Bay Area and I love California. Amen.
I think,
Do we have one more or do we?
Algie,
Can you talk to why that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great one to end on.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. I just want to say
and
we're not
explain
going.
what the symbol that Liz.
Yeah. So can you explain this? Is what they said, which is the cross fingers. I do want to give a shout out to Mia Kwan, who designed this incredible cover. She did an amazing job. I maybe was a butt face about it every once in a while at the early days. If I'm gonna listen, I'd like to be honest. But there could be no other cover. This is a once in a lifetime cover, and I love it so much, and I'm so happy for it because it represents a lot of different things for me. But one, it is just she actually made a lithograph. She actually made it and like worked on it and like did it like not like on a computer, but like actually carved something. The reason I'm talking in vagaries is because I don't know how to do it. But she did cool stuff, and it looks exactly like a punk rock poster you might find hanging at the bar that I used to work at. It also looks very much like the woodcut prints of the Catholic worker that I mentioned earlier. That was very much their artistic design, and that is incredible. The cross fingers is something that I also have tattooed on me, but the reason that it is on this book is it comes from 3 different things that we all know, right? One, luck. We make this sign when we're hoping, fingers crossed. I do it all the time. And for me, it's a mini form of prayer. And I used to think that before I knew this, but it is actually a mini form of prayer. The reason, fact check me on the real historicalness, but a story that was told to me is that in ancient times in Rome, before Christianity became the main religion of Rome, and they were still persecuting Christians, they would ask if you believed in Jesus or you believed in God, and you would put your hands behind your back and you would make the sign of the cross, asking God's forgiveness as you said, no, I don't, so that you were not persecuted. So that is what
Alice is nodding, so that means it's true.
All right, we'll take it. But so that it's a sign of good luck, and it means good luck, but it actually comes from this kind of very dark place, which is asking forgiveness while telling a lie. And so that is another part of it for me, is that I remember being a kid and doing that too. Again, I don't think you know about that background, but you're like, oh, I can say this. Yeah. And that to me gets to this heart of what stories are told to us. What is the truth? The things that I'm really grappling with in this collection. So thank you for asking that. That was the first time I got asked that.
Good job, Liz.
Everybody who tuned in virtually, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of you